But the first thing that I want to talk about and that I'm going to talk about a lot because repetition is going to be something that I say a lot in these classes is the feeling. And I know I've talked to you about this before, Vicky, but the feeling that we bring in to a space does a lot of the work that we usually depend on the intellect for. Because the feeling is our highest consciousness, the feeling that we bring forward and shine our light and our love and our presence on other people is what actually does all the hard work. And it took me so long to understand what that meant. But I do feel like the teachers that taught me that said it in so many different ways before I understood it. So it's an honor to be able to say, look, the feeling is the most important thing. It's really, there are no rules with soul coaching, which you'll see, but there are a lot. You'll get it. And then you'll say, oh, this is my version of soul coaching. This is who I am. This is how I can step forward and serve. Because we're all different. Like all of our energy is different. And so we're all going to have a very unique individual aspect of us that steps forward and it's going to look very different. So I can't be like my mentors can't be like me. Um, Two of my mentors are husband and wife, and she forever wanted to be like her husband because he was just brilliant at what he does. And she says, I just always wanted to be like George. I always wanted to be like George. Everybody wants to be like George. But at the end of the day, she's like, I couldn't do it. She's like, I just realized all I had was me. And everybody in the crowd was like, thank God, because we don't know what we'd do without you. Right. And the way that she articulates things, the way that she teaches, the way that she shares is very, you know, it's hand in hand with what George does, but it's very different and it's very needed and it's very necessary. And so I know what questions I would ask her versus George. And what I found is all of the people that are doing it, it's really our greatest authenticity. It's really our highest expression. It's us allowing ourselves to be ourselves, not comparing ourselves to other people, but to figure out who we are more, not trying to be somebody else other than, but to figure out who we are more. And I think that that's okay, especially in the beginning. I feel like we all want to be like someone else. But at the end of the day, when we are in that feeling and we're allowing ourselves to teach the way that we teach and to do the things that we do, um, it really does it really is unique to our own mission, our own soul path, our own expression. And it's so beautiful because again, no two people do it the same. No two people do it the same. So the feeling, my mentors told me, 3 years down the line, oh, there's no rules here. You get to do whatever. That's really hard on the intellect when it wants to like, Robert, I need a three formula step system. I think we did a podcast where I explained the whole thing to him. And at the end of it, he's like, okay, so here's your three steps. And I was like, no, 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 no. You don't need the three steps. It's really being present. And there are some things that I'll teach you moving forward that also entail soul coaching, of course, because there's my way of teaching it. But the feeling really is, if I were to say there's one rule, it's to show up in a good feeling. Show up and you could be neutral. You can be full of love. I like to, and as good of a feeling as you can. We are human, right? But the feeling is compassion towards humanity. For those of us that are like, what is this feeling? We have so many feelings, but the feeling is it's so high vibrational and it's so present and it's so pure that it almost wraps a hug around the person in front of you. And they begin to feel safe, feel heard, feel seen. And there's an energetic barrier that's let down on their side that helps them feel like they can let go of whatever it is that they've been holding on to for one reason or another. And whenever I teach anything, I'm I'm making sure that I'm showing up in that feeling. So that means I'm not judging the people that are in front of me, right? Because the intellect does that. I know there are some cues where I'm like, here's how I know I'm not in the feeling. I'm judging the people or my intellect is like, this person, you don't like them. Any time that I hear something like that go through my mind, I know that I'm not in the feeling. Um, and that's just maybe a childhood memory or just something that's kind of running in the background, right? Maybe it's a um, conditioning. Doesn't matter. I can set aside my conditioning and still be in the feeling because the feeling is higher consciousness. It's high vibrational energy. It's love. It's light. It's purity. And from the feeling, all the magic happens. All the magic happens because we can work with the other person's higher self for them to be able to see and understand exactly what it is that they need to hear or see or understand. But that can't come from a space of low vibrational energy. So, as we elevate our feeling, what we're doing is we're tapping into universal consciousness. And from universal consciousness, we go into a state of flow. We go into that state of presence. We go into connecting with their higher self. And then we essentially can get downloads or things that come to mind that we need to say, or or we get sometimes nothing at all. And sometimes nothing at all is exactly what they need. They just need to sit in silence. They need to sit in presence. They need to sit in the feeling. So I'm going to talk about the feeling a lot because we're each going to find a way that gets us there. So for me, for example, I think about humanity. I think about the conscious collective. I think about how we're all connected. I think about how much I love the person sitting across from me. I think about how we're all in this together. I think about how much of a god they are. I look at everybody like they're a god because I know they are. And I look at how our similarities are that our thoughts get in our way, our thinking gets in our way. I can kind of feel like um, I know what holds us back. So that's what I do. I know um, other people, in order to get into the feeling, they just think of love. So I think the first thing I'd like you guys to do, because I don't want to go too deep into like, here's the entire process, go practice it, would be to see if you can get yourself in a high vibrational state of just feeling love for yourself and everybody here. Even if you don't feel it for yourself, it's okay. What you want to do is just make sure that the feeling is emanating like from your being, because again, that is you're going to have your own understanding of what that does. And I highly recommend that everybody keep track of what it is that you do to get yourself there. But but are you able to get yourself into a heartfelt space of, being um, present? Some people explain the feeling as presence. That's something else that you're going to um, let me write this down. That's something else that you're going to decide is what is the articulation of the feeling for you. And the funny thing is that at the end of the day, all my coaches call it the feeling. So for me, that's what it feels like. I said love, presence, unconditional love. It's unconditional love for the person in front of me. So that's why no matter how, let's say, screwed up, my ego is like, that person's so screwed up. They got to do this and this and this. I know that they're God. I know that they are an aspect of God. I know that they're a shard of perception. And I know because we all are. And it doesn't make me any better than anybody, obviously. But no matter how my ego may perceive somebody or my intellect may perceive somebody, I know that underneath all of their thought patterns, they are a diamond just trying to come out, right? And so the feeling is the first thing that we do in order to create the space for that. And also, it's been proven even scientifically that the feeling that the therapist brings into the space is so important. So if a therapist is having a bad day and they come into a space and they're just, full of rotten feelings, then the person that they are trying to treat essentially doesn't get any better. So there's some scientific evidence for this too, but we'll just start maybe with Vicky. Vicky, are you able to just get yourself into a heartfelt, loving feeling on a present feeling on the drop of a dime? And if you are, then that's great. But if not, like it took me, as soon as I realized how to do it, I was like, oh, I could do that. But it took me some time. But what's your experience?
I can. I don't have trouble with that. However, this is where the ego comes in. I don't always want to. So it's an interesting topic that you're talking about today because so there's a young lady that someone asked me to coach. And so I'm coaching her just to help her in her corporate life. But of course, so much of how we show up in our corporate life is how we're showing up as humans and beings. And so even though I'm supposed to be coaching her on how to get promoted, I don't think she can until she addresses a lot of the other things of beingness, right? And all the underlying root causes behind why she's not getting promoted. So I just came out of the coaching session with her before I jumped on. And everything that you spoke of, that empathy, that compassion, that presence with her, that, like really just genuine desire to help her, 100% there. Now, over the weekend, we had families staying with us, and one family member drove me insane. And I was very present with the negative emotions that I was experiencing. And I was like, see them as light, see them as this, see them as that. I know it all in here. But I was like, nope, I'm too mad at them to do that. And so that's where the ego was coming through and was like refusing. Like, I didn't want to release it. I knew how to, but I didn't want to. So just being super honest about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also just when you guys share your experiences with your clients and such, it helps me build the program because I can already understand like the next lesson that I would give when we show up to help somebody. Because as I said at the beginning of this video or at the beginning of this recording, we don't actually know on an intellectual level, we don't know what's going to help somebody. We can't know because we don't know their life experiences. We don't know what blocks are there. We don't know anything. And so much of me showing up for soul coaching, you notice there's a difference for me between soul coaching and maybe pushing you towards your goals. It's a little bit different on my part because soul coaching, I'm very present and I'm assisting you with getting to what it is that you need to see. But with pushing you towards your goals, it's more practical, right? It's like let's even if I can't tell you what the next step is, let's entertain some of the next steps together. You're either going to agree with me or you're going to get an insight into what your next step actually is, right? So that's why even in business, I can't tell anybody what it is that they need to do. I would be lying. It's more like in business, it's an experience, it's an experiment. Everything in marketing that we do is something that we're trying because I know that as soulpreneurs in business, we're creating something that only we can create that's coming from our heart. And I can't even know what that is. So I can guide you. I could give you my ideas. I would tell you what I would do. You can try. And I recommend that everybody try everything. You know, it's called try shit. That's one of my principles. Just try shit and see what works because you don't know and you can't know if it even works for your life until you try it. So it's a very different job than what we're used to. But in soul coaching, it's so simple and it's so easy because we don't have to show up knowing anything about the person. And in fact, for one-on-one business coaching, I need to know where people are at. I need to know what they've done. I'd like to know what they tried. I like to know what's working for them. I like to know, if they have a product or a program or a service. Soul coaching, I don't need to know any of that. I don't need to know any of their past history. I don't know any of their where they want to go, really. Not, I mean, maybe if we're looking at a specific goal and we're working that into the present moment, then yeah, we could talk about that. But they show up with what it is that they are bringing. They show up with the baggage, right? Well, I don't even know what that baggage is. So the less that I know about somebody, the better. I can work with anybody. I don't need them to fill out an application. I don't need them to tell me anything. In fact, I don't want to know because then my intellect or my ego will start to say, "Oh, this is what I did," or "This is how you can get through that. Here's my advice to you." And advice, unless someone actually has an insight and can know how to apply what it is that we're even offering, then advice is pretty cheap too, right? So that's why in soul coaching, and that's why it's so transformative, is because individuals are able to see for themselves what they need. And as a coach, that's what people need. They need to see it for themselves. So when I was a teenager, my mom would always say, "Don't do that. That's a stupid decision." But I never knew why she'd say that, so I'd go and do it. And I'm like, "Oh, now I know why you said it was so stupid. Now I know why." But she wouldn't even really explain to me as to why it was a stupid decision. I would just want to figure out why. And then I'm like, "Oh, yeah, mom said that was dumb. I agree." Or I would disagree with her. And my daughter's the same way. She would say, "Mom, I just did it to prove you wrong." So we don't understand things until we have an insight about them. So what we're doing when we're having the feeling is we're creating the space for them to have an insight, for them to see something for themselves that they need to integrate. It's oftentimes like an integration of an energy, which comes across as an insight. And I know we've all have had insights here to where it's not a thought, it's not an idea, it's literally a sight from within that is very sometimes quiet and it just kind of whispers to you, right? And that's what we want people to see in the space of soul coaching is the insight that they need to have. And in order to create that space for them to have the insight, we have to get into the feeling first because it quiets down their intellect. We want to create a quiet space. I call this more like setting the stage when we're first sitting with the client. Obviously there's things like getting rapport and making sure that they trust us. Building the rapport, building the trust, even if it's on an intellectual level first, and then moving into the feeling of quiet, of presence, and setting the stage for them to have that that transformational insight that they need to have. And of course, I'll say again, if we come with any preconceived notions, any like, "Oh, I know where this person needs to go, I know exactly what they need," we end up not hearing them. We end up not, all that stuff gets in the way.
Can I just interject here? So, everything that you just said is 100% applicable at work, in corporate as well. And this is the missing link between unsuccessful to successful leadership. And I think that what you're talking about is gold because when people are like, well, I don't know, because the girl that I'm talking to, she's like, well, I don't know how to go from this to that because they don't see me this way and the other way. And I'm like, that's because you need to connect. You need to connect on a human level. And that connection, whether you're in the coaching space, in my tea space, in corporate space, I think that is the missing link from not being able to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve to being able to achieve it. I just wanted to highlight that for you because I think that this gets lost. And I think it's the unspoken gray space that is the bridge from one to the other.
Absolutely, it is. And it's also the missing link into how we create our own realities. And I can go more into that, but one of my mentors, so we're probably like the third generation. I would say I'm probably the third generation. My teachers that helped me understand this are first, am I third? I don't know. They're first generation. So Sydney Banks wrote a book called The Missing Link about soul coaching, is what I call soul coaching. But obviously, I've interjected my own stuff in there in order to teach it. And I am a different generation than him. So I feel like we're new energy infusing into what he's learned. But my mentors, they're of his same generation. They're still alive, which I think is really cool because they're like, well, Sid said, so we're young enough still to where it's not 2000 years ago Sydney Banks said this. But yeah, he wrote a book about the missing link. And if you read that book, I've got it somewhere on my I'll show you for anybody watching. This is what it looks like. The Missing Link by Sydney Banks. Reflections on Philosophy and Spirit. And that's why my tagline too is called Bringing Spirit Back into Business, is because I want people to show up in a space. Sure, we could learn everything about marketing and business and the skill and those things that we need in order to actually tangibly, practically apply and build, right? And that's why I kind of go back and forth on the two, is because a lot of people are stuck in that figuring out, where when they can tap into this space of presence and mindlessness, as I like to call it, they actually get access to everything that they need, even if it's, what teacher do I need to teach me the skills of marketing? They'll get that insight, they'll get that hit, because there are practical skills, and that was really one of my biggest struggles was, well, if there's practical skills, and then if everything that we need to know is inside of us, then what does that leave for all the teachers in the world? And that's when I realized that if I gave Vicky a chore to go learn Kung Fu, she's probably not just she might be able to sit in meditation and come up with some of those movements herself, right? But it can be a heck of a lot easier if we have teachers saying, here's here's the white belt, right? Here's the orange belt. Here's the yellow belt. Here's what you need in order to fill the gaps so that along the way you don't get lost and miss something really important. And then in Kung Fu, we even say, figure out what works for you. Figure out what your movement is. If you were to get into some kind of altercation, a 4-foot person is not going to try a roundhouse kick to the head. They're just not going to do it. So they're going to figure out how they can, with their being, protect themselves, or whatever it is that they want to do, because Kung Fu is also a defensive sport, essentially, which means we do not promote violence at all, but we want people to have the skill in order to apply it. And that's really when I combine soul coaching with business and marketing. It's like, I could teach you all of these things, but you look inside of you and you figure out what works for you. Um, but yeah, absolutely, Vicky, that is what's missing, because people are too much in their intellect. They have forgotten who they are as spiritual beings. They have forgotten this energy and this presence, and how to bring this into their everyday life. And that's why it's it's such a hot commodity when it comes to being a coach, when it comes to being a soul coach. It's, oh, there's this part of me that I forgot about. And the way that I define coaching is I show people how to find that part of them so that they need it, so that when they need it, they can find it. Like, that's really all it comes down to. Um, Reaching goals, application, that's a little bit different type of, momentum moving forward, but you have to have this pureness, aware of this pureness. It's always there. It's not something that just shows up when we need it. It's literally always there. We can choose to have it work with the intellect. Like the lady that you're talking about, Becky, if she could figure out how to be present, she would have the insights. If she had the space and the container, she could have the insight of, oh, how can I connect with people? How can I begin to feel safe doing that? What is the next thing that I can do in order to create the relationships that I need in order to do X, right? She needs to be able to see that, because her definition of connection is probably not what your definition of connection is, right? So she's going to have to see what that means for her.
And that's exactly what we've been doing, is becoming, like, I've been teaching her how to become present with how she's feeling and the thoughts that are running through her head, and how to be okay with that. And that's like literally what we were going through today. And it's interesting how the mind just wants like the steps. And I could see that that's what she wants for me. I know that's what she wants for me. Like, make this PowerPoint, go talk to this leader, present yourself as this, and then you get promoted. And I'm like, I can't give you that, because it's how you show up. That's what you get judged on. And there was a really interesting article today in Medium where they said, since when does the vibe in the interview supersede um, your skill sets? Like people are getting hired now based on the vibe, which to me means like energy that you
Mhm.
come into versus the skill sets and the number and the years of experience. And that's literally how we've been hiring so many people at work as well, is based on the energy with which they come into the interview process. So it's
Yeah,
everywhere.
it really is, and I'm not surprised because of the new earth kind of revelation that we're going forward and through and with is that, the understanding that every one of us is actually just energy. Our body is, and our intellect can do things, but there's a cap on the intellect. The intellect can do maybe 20%. You tap into this formless nature, you're unstoppable. There is no cap to that, and that's where creativity is born. That's why I preach why creativity and so is so important because it's a part of that tapping into. But I had a conversation with Dick and Bettinger, who is a he's a transformational coach, and he really is a three principles teacher and mentor. And I asked him specifically, I said, well, when it comes to entrepreneurs and businesses and such, what advice would you give them? And he just told a story about how a business had a certain amount of problems that this guy who was very high IQ, totally intellectual, he just couldn't solve them because he was always working from the ego. He wasn't able to see past that. And so the problems never got solved. And when he learned how to tap into this aspect of him, not only were his problems solved, his family life changed because he showed up in his family different with this heart centered, more creative flow about him. And I really do feel like it is what's missing. It really is what's missing in businesses and leadership and corporations. And that's why when I kind of saw that, well, the space of the experience isn't working, so maybe I could teach this. And always wanted to teach this, how people like you, Vicky, are showing up and you're like, yeah, this is missing, right? This is what is missing because we've forgotten our spiritual nature. And that's why it's so natural for us to do this. It's not, it's a remembering, it's really a remembering, of this part of us. And the more that we can come together and create the feeling and the space for people to remember who they are, the more lives we're going to change, right? So, like I said, when it comes to sitting across from another person, I sometimes will know on a very deep level what insight I would like them to have, and I can guide them towards that insight. But more than anything, I'm setting the stage for them to have it for themselves because telling people what they need to do or what they should do, it's only going to go surface level, you know? So I would ask your client, Vicky, like what her definition of connecting is, right? And kind of one of the things that I love to do is I go deeper into one subject, one topic. What does that even mean for her, right? We're going to do on the Soulpreneur, the global community tomorrow, the individual definitions of success. And we'll see that everybody has a different definition of success, right? So, compassion, everybody has a different definition of compassion. Like everything that we say, we experience differently. And I think that that's why us telling people what they should do or using words doesn't always help, but when we can get them to look deeper with that feeling of presence and love and heartfelt energy that we're kind of encompassing the space with the feeling, they'll say, oh, they'll have the aha moment that changes them and they will continue to change. And that's why with my soul coaching clients, I don't even look at my notes of where they were last time because they're such a different person every time I see them. So it's a brand new person every time they show up.
That's for sure. I'm so sorry. I have to drop. Um, but this is fascinating and I love it and I love it and I wish I could stay, but I love it. And thank you, Laura, for kind of getting into this space because I think that while I'm gonna call it, you're gonna teach the beingness. I think so much doingness is gonna come out of the beingness. But the beingness I feel like comes first. So, I absolutely adore this. And, even though like I'm not doing any coaching, I still get so much from what you're teaching. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I
Yeah,
adore this.
yeah, yeah, of course. And
Awesome.
the recording will be up. And then, just to before you have to run, the being is important because without that, we don't know what to do. And that's why I have a hard time telling people what to do because I could show them 10 different options. And once they tap into that being, they're going to say, oh, it's that one. That's what I need. But without that knowledge and that connection of themselves and who they are showing up in their presence, they're going to try everything that I say. And they're going to say, why am I so exhausted? None of it worked. It's because you're right. They have to go into that being first. It is. And then it's a beautiful dance between doing and being, a beautiful dance between spirit and the intellect. So yeah.
So true. That is so true. And that's definitely been my journey. So awesome.
All right.
Amazing. Thank
Well,
you. I
thank you,
wish I could
Vicky.
say. Okay.
No
I'm
worries.
gonna try to join tomorrow though. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
See ya.
Mhm.
Vicky.
Hey, Angelique. And you're
Hey,
still, I can see, it's so weird. I can see you. Hold on a second. I can see you as a fool, or I can see me. That's the only option I have.
oh, how bizarre.
Yeah,
Huh.
that's okay. So, Angelique, how has any of that resonated with you and who you work with?
It absolutely resonates in the type of work that I do. I I cannot have a preconceived idea or expectation when I get on a call with somebody. Rather, I have to meet them exactly where they're at energetically. The only way to do that is to just come as a as an empty vessel, see what they bring to that. And depending on what they bring, um, at that moment, I have to determine how to augment that or what needs to be taken out of their field. And I can only do that if I'm in that completely, it's like a wiped state of mind, meaning I've wiped all intellect out. I have no nothing of their past matters. This is just in the absolute present moment. Any previous conversation I had with them, none of that matters either because they could be in a very different energy at the time of our call. So and the best work that I do is when I don't come with any preconceived ideas or expectations. Like say I want to achieve this in this time that we have together. That's not up to me. So again, that pulls you out of you have to be pulled out of the intellect for that. You can't have both. And especially for the type of work that I do, which is very spiritually based, um, it it's working in a watercolor field, right? It's not, and you can only do that fine work, that oil type of work. It once you know what's there. So it has to build on its own. You can't bring your intellect in and build it in a direction that it's not supposed to go in. It doesn't flow. There's no flow there.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why, with, I love to use the art of Kung Fu as an analogy here because we will teach people the movements, right? Like, here's how you do like the important things, like having a stance with your legs. Like, if you're not solidly standing, um, in, a certain position, you could be knocked over, right? But there are certain ways that you can use your legs in order to ground yourself and be firm. So, like a linebacker comes and pushes you over, you're not going anywhere, right? So there's that practical, tangible form. And I love to or sometimes compare the intellect with form because it can be very logical, it can be very practical, it can be very from our experience, right? But then there's that formless nature. And that's how the art of Kung Fu gets better is people will say, I was using this and I spun around and I did this and that's how I came up with another form, right? So that beingness and that present space that we talk about, which I call the formless nature, is where all of these other things are born. And then in order to teach them, we pull them into form, right? And Kung Fu in that arena. And then we have something else that we learned from our own experience. And then we go back to the form of it, which is actually the Kung Fu form. And then we kind of teach people how to use it in a formless way, in a very flowy way, right? It's like formless and form, solid, non-solid, right? Earth and water kind of type of things. But yeah, we when I soul coach, it really is that presence because you're right. We can't bring anything with us or we're not serving anybody, right? And that's why I try not to say anything about anybody that um that wouldn't honor who they are underneath all of that because I know who they are. I see who they are. I also can oftentimes feel their energy on top of all that if they could figure out within themselves kind of how to wipe that all away, they'll have a remembrance of who they are. And unfortunately, that's part of the human experience is to forget. But I like what you said about, you know, showing up as an empty vessel. And the ways that I learned how to do that was a couple things. I call it blank slate, or I would take, or when I show other people how to do this, I just take a whiteboard and I write stuff on it and I wipe it all off. So I think you said something about um, just being so, like white, and that's like you just want blank, nothing, so that you don't bring anything into it because then we're getting in the way of the process of universal mind and such working through us. But when I was a private investigator, I learned early on that I was hired to be a neutral third party. So that means I was out reporting. I didn't judge one way or the other what I thought about something. I just reported and then I would uh, usually work for one side or the other. So I would just very neutrally go and see what I saw, go and type up what I found and then submit it to the judge or submit it to the party that would then use that to figure out one side or the other. So my job as a neutral third party, like I said, I realized real quick, like I can't have any opinions about anything. I literally go in. That's where we get into the courts and we're talking about hearsay. That's why it's not relevant. It's because it's what somebody else is saying about something, right? So we go in with absolutely nothing. And then when we're being present with another person, then everything that we needs to see or listen to or you know, everything pops up in that space. And then we work with what comes in the present moment because whatever comes up in that moment is to be trusted, right? On both sides.
Right. And it's more accurate because it doesn't have that that taint of a bias that you may have come in with. And so it's coming from a much more pure state. And the only way to achieve that is to be fully in the present, um, meaning that if, um, like we were saying earlier, like say your coffee maker exploded 10 minutes earlier and you dropped your coffee cup and it shattered on the floor, that experience cannot taint you going in to a container with somebody to be in the present with them because you're bringing that in. So yeah, it's an exercise in being in that formless state and and just uh going with that and it's difficult when you're first learning how to do that, but it becomes so natural. It is a much more desired state to be in for everything. Think about it. If we spend our whole day doing that, and that's a good exercise to begin to that practice, building that muscle, our days would be much different. Um, and so, yeah,
Yeah, it is. And the other thing that kind of taught me how to do this, and when I was understanding that I wasn't ready to do this also was when I became a certified yoga teacher as part of my healing. It wasn't in order to teach, but I understood that if I were to teach, and when I did teach, that I had to leave everything off the mat. I had to show up in my best energy and leave everything that was troubling me behind because I couldn't show up and teach with all of my own baggage, right? So
right,
I would have been struggling, crying, frustrated, right? So I realized before I even stepped on the mat as a teacher, I needed to get into a good feeling. I needed to understand that the feeling that I was projecting out into the room was important. And I also needed to understand that the more mindless that I could be, the better. And the other thing that really showed me this before we hop off here is learning kung fu. I mean, I used to try to understand the intricacies of everything. So much so that I was frustrated, I was overwhelmed, I was irritated at the end of every lesson. And then finally, I said, what if I just get my mind out of the way and let my body do what it does? So I learned how to quiet the mind that way too. So it was always realizing that if I showed up without all of this other stuff, I was so much more effective and so much more efficient, even in learning, right? So just being present without it's all past, and it's all past thoughts anyways, right? The nothing exists in the present moment except for the memories that we're bringing in, and and the now. So why not just leave all those memories behind and work in the present moment, work with the present moment, because that's where the magic is. That's what Eckhart Tolle wrote about in The Power of Now, is the present moment and having only that with you, and that's the only tool that you need in soul coaching. So not that there isn't more to learn, because I'm excited to teach it, but yeah, it's very natural for us.
yeah. And I can see where it would be um, more natural for some people who are very highly empathic to do that than it would, because when you're using that skill of your empathy and compassion, that's the feminine side of the brain. That's not the masculine side. And the masculine side is that intellect and reason and logic. So it's again delineating between the two, and then it's just a practice, and but yes, it's most assuredly the best way to, um, and I think moving forward, um, the more successful coaches will employ that most of the time, if not all of the time, because the old systems are going to start to collapse around them. So
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
timely.
Absolutely. I know, right? And absolutely everything, because the new earth systems that are coming through people it can only be accessed from the space. And so a
Right.
lot of people, I think, are realizing, like, my intellect's not building what I want, and then they learn about their creativity, and then they can see that all of this insight and energy comes from the now moment, and then they can allow that to come through them. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to also teach this and give people the experience of it, is because when you tap into this, it doesn't just work in one area of our lives, as we've talked about, right? It's not just how to be a coach. It's not just coaching. It's not just psychology. It's not just being a mentor to others. It's not anything. It's everything, because it's part of who we are as our spiritual nature, is to have access to the now and all of the magic and the insights and the intuitions and the knowings and the infinite wisdom that is already part of universal mind. And when we are present, universal mind is just working with us, like, oh, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to say. Here's what here's who you could go learn from, or uh, here's a deeper understanding of this or that, right? And then we're working with the magic of the universe instead of the intellect with its, 10% ability, or whatever that percentage is, trying to take the wheel, right? And think it knows what it's doing. And that's
Absolutely.
why we get
Right.
exhausted because it doesn't know. So,
Absolutely. And you're right, it is exhausting because your mind is trying so hard to run circles around itself to complete something. It's not necessary.
absolutely. Absolutely. And
At all.
the brain is not even designed. The intellect can execute, but the brain is not designed to figure things out. The brain is a receiver, right? So
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense that we're receiving all of this while we're being present. We're receiving what we need to know. We're receiving,
Mhm.
that's its function. It's one of its primary functions, but its primary function is not to figure things out because it's not even designed to do that, right? So we think that it is because that's what, school and all those things have taught
That's
us
what
is
we do
like,
that. Yeah.
yeah, memorize, apply this to this, but
Right.
there's a whole new world out there that we're opening people up to, I think.
Absolutely. And so this is very timely, and I think it will help a lot of people to. It's absolutely foundational that they apply the being in the present moment because that's all we actually have. And so, yeah, all the past, as a coach, all the past things that somebody else has tried or you have, it's not going to help to apply what you've applied to a previous client to a new client. That's not going to help at all. It's a totally different energy, totally different person. So
Yeah.
you have to be in the present moment. You have to meet that person exactly where they're at. You don't know where that's at until they open their mouth and you see energetically what their frequency is. You get that feeling, and you can't get those feelings if you come in there with your intellect. Oh, very timely.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm excited for the next lesson. So we'll see how this unfolds. I do know that more programs are coming forward as to teach people how to do this on a more intensive level. So for anybody listening, uh, the Light Workers Lounge right now is once a month as we gain people that are interested and that feel called to do this work, or to learn it no matter what field you're in, right? Like this is part of our human nature is the spiritual aspect of us that is always there, as we are spirits having a human experience. So it's so helpful to remember who we are. But yeah, I think that's it. So, Angelique, thank you for being here. And I'll make sure that to keep you up to date on anything that derives from this other than our regular monthly meetups. But I hope you found it helpful.
Very. I really did. Thank you so much, Laura, for bringing this forward. And as always,
Yes, thank you, Angelique. Well, I hope to see you tomorrow.
okay, yep. I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. All right. All right. Enjoy your day.
You too. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye.